Gender transformation in the South African public and private workplaces has been the policy position of the South African government since the onset of our democracy. But how meaningful has that change been, especially when you look further up the organizational organogram? Good evening. My name is Oliver Dixon, and welcome to another installment of Democracy 30. Tonight we ask, has South Africa's workplace seen substantive gender transformation over the past 30 years? We're joined in studio by Nico Mabunda, who's the Deputy Director General for the Department of Public Service and Administration in charge of gender transformation in the public service. We're going to be joined over Zoom by Zingiswa Losi, who's the President of the COSATU, Congress of South African Trade Unions, as well as Cass Kovaria, who's the CEO of Business Unity South Africa. But first, let's hear what your views have been about the role of women in the workplace.
Women have been given enough opportunity everywhere. In the workplace, women are given positions.
We are not given equal opportunities, women and men. Sometimes they are given, but not always. And it's wrong because when I say equality, I believe that we need to be equal.
I feel like they tried, Mara, it didn't work out so good. They tried to make it equal, but it's still like going on. So
no, opportunity take on.
Example, president is always a man. Why can't change? Make a woman lead something.
In the public sector, I can see that they are trying their best to get females in sort of management roles, key roles in a business.
But we women, we work very hard compared to men, and we can do the same job that men are doing.
We are given equal opportunities, but it depends how we utilize our opportunities.
Way back, we used to have older people who didn't believe in women. But as time goes on, people are more enlightened and they are getting more information. So now women are given equal opportunities.
We don't know something else. But when
it comes to gender equality in South Africa as a whole, we still have a long way to go. Because overall, whenever any position comes up, men are always prioritized over women. And even if you are doing the same job, men always get paid more.
And we begin the conversation this evening with my guest, Nico Mabunda, who is the Deputy Director General in the Department of Public Service and Administration, overseeing very specifically the thing we're talking about tonight, and that is gender transformation. Nico, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it. How vast is this public service, and how integrated at both across the board, but very specifically on a senior management level, are women?
Good evening to you and the viewers. So we have 1.2 million public servants at the national and provincial level of our government. We also, if we look only at the public service, but if we look at the public sector, we have about 1.8 million, but I'm only responsible for the 1.2 million, even though we are working towards a single public administration. So when we talk about the issues of gender in the public service, we have a number of, we look at it in a different manner. We want to look at it in an integrated way where we look at the barriers that exist and not only just the numbers. So the numbers are quite important in terms of representativity. But we also have to look at, once women are in these positions, what are the support measures that we provide? So recently we've just passed in a new policy that speaks to the elimination of harassment and violence in the public service. So things like mental bullying, like violence itself, and so forth. So that if women when women in fact get the opportunities to be in these leadership positions, they're also provided with an enabling environment for them to be able to perform, to retain those positions, but also to be a productive member of the public service as well as communities.
Yeah, of the 1.2 million public servants that we have in South Africa, how many of them are women, and how many are managers, senior managers, and of that, what is the percentage of women?
So due to the history of the functions of society, let me put it like that, we have about 67% of females being the public, in the public service made up of 67%, women rather, make up 67% of all the public servants. That's largely because in education as well as in health, the large numbers are, which are the largest employers, by the way, in the public service, are female. And then when we move to senior managers, which out of the 1.2 million, we only have about 9,300 senior managers in the public service. 44% of those are females and 56% of those are male. So there is a little bit of a skew that we are trying to address, especially since Cabinet made a decision that we need to have a 50-50% representativity. The challenge that we also have is on the issue of I was doing some research earlier and I looked at the education sector, for instance, because that's one area that we have been looking at. We found that out of the educators that we have, about 69 to 70% of them are female, but only 39% of them make up principals. So we have done a lot of work, but there are areas that we still need to improve on.
This is a very rudimentary question. How do you become a senior manager in the public service?
There are a number of things. You must first have the minimum qualifications. We require you to have a junior degree to be a senior manager. You must also have some experience of managing people at the middle management level, but there are also competencies and skills such as managing people, change management, financial management, and so forth. So in terms of the transformation that we're trying to lead as a public service, we're trying to make sure that we provide those examples of opportunities for everyone in the public service, especially at the junior level. So the Director General, Ms. Yolisa Makasi, has established a network for women in the public service so that they can talk about the challenges that they have in terms of growing into positions, but also once they have grown into those positions, what are the generational issues that affect women that only them can understand. And I was remarking earlier that we have, in your panel, we have 3 males that are talking about gender issues. So it's quite interesting. But it's a conversation that requires both males and females to address. So we need to look at all the societal elements to address patriarchy, to address challenges that are even beyond the workplace. That's why earlier I started with the issue of the elimination of violence and harassment in the world of work.
One of the other things with regards to barriers that women face in the workplace, and this is a lot more prevalent and pervasive in the private sector, is a pay gap disparity. Now, it's not so pervasive in the public sector.
It doesn't exist
because it is all regulated, right?
Yes.
But there are instances where there are certain disparities that face women in the public sector that may not necessarily exist in the private sector, and that is perhaps politics, the politicization of certain roles in the public sector that women perhaps are on the back foot of, that men who seem to be at the forefront of political visibility are able to access. Talk to us about in what ways we're using policy in the public service to ensure that those are mitigated.
So in the public service, we have what we call public sector reforms that we have initiated following the Chapter 13 of the National Development Plan, as when it was passed, the responses that were given by the President to the Zondo Commission, for instance. As part of the professionalization of the public service, we are looking at certain reforms that are going to eliminate any whiff of political challenges that may be faced by any public servant. So the good thing is that with the norms and standards that we set as the Department of Public Service and Administration, we do not allow for any political interference in any way whatsoever. So there are very clear regulated prescripts on how we do recruitment. that very clear regulated prescripts on the management of any challenges that comes with any illegal instructions that may come. There are clear guidelines on how those are evoked, are implemented, and so forth. So we have eliminated anything that may be termed as political interference based on the policies that we have come up with. And we have made it quite clear by providing step-by-step guidelines to human resource managers within the public service on how to deal with recruitment, how to set up adverts, how to recruit, how to do interviews. And these are things that were not normally they were just put as policies, but there were no guidelines on how to do it. We issue circulars almost every other day on clarifying policy positions of the department, as well as providing guidance to heads of department and through heads of corporate services that we interact with on a daily basis on how to manage these challenges that may arise.
So it's an official position of the state that there must be gender parity across the entire state apparatus, very specifically also at senior management position levels. But we're not there yet. What is the roadmap towards that?
So we have decided that what we need to do, there has been a massive progress since 1994. For instance, in 1994, there were only 2% of female leaders at the DG level. And now we have 33%. It's still a little bit low because we need to have a 50-50% representativity. But there has been growth. And if you look at the SMS level, as I mentioned earlier, it's 44%. So what we have done is that even in the political offices, like for instance, the appointment of special advisors, we have provided guidelines to departments as well as the political leadership at the deputy minister and minister level, for them that when they appoint, even in their offices, they have to think about political gender representativity. Whether it's at the special advisor level, whether it's in the offices, in the private offices. But at the state level, at least, we are aware that we have the equities that we must meet, and we do monitor those on an ongoing basis. We also have clear guidelines on what we have. Annually, we have what we call the Public Women Week, and the Public Women in Management Week in the public service, where the head of the department is duty-bound to sit with the females in each and every department and say,
can I pause you there? Because I want us to come back to what the day-to-day management of gender transformation looks like in the public sector. And I think it's important that we have real practicalized examples of that. We're going to continue the conversation on the other side of this. Don't go away. And welcome back to Democracy 30. Tonight we ask the question, have we done enough over the last 30 years to effect gender transformation in the workplace, both in the private sector workplace as well as in the public sector workspace? Before we go back to the conversation that we've been having, let's take a look at this graph, which gives us a representation of top management level by gender in the year 2023, comparing both male and men and women to each other, but also the private sector to the public sector. The yellow graph you see, that is what's happening in government, in the public sector. The blue graph that you see, the blue bar of the graph, is what's happening in the private sector. Now, the private sector, of course, has a lot to answer for here, because the top managers in the private sector, just about 75% of them are men. To give you a good sense of what that looked like, it means that only effectively 2.5 of every 10 people making up top management level in the private sector happen to be a woman. 2.5 in every 10. In government, it's a little bit different in that it's closer approximates parity, in the sense that 35% of top managers in government happen to be women, and 64%, just about 65% happen to be men. Perhaps to ask the question, more directly, and I did ask the earlier question, which is, what does the day-to-day management of gender transformation look like? And, you know, government is the biggest employer, so I guess in this instance, the private sector has a lot to learn from the public sector on transformation management in the workplace. What does the day-to-day management of it look like?
Thanks for that. But I think first I must clarify, when we look at the 35.4% and the 64.6%, those are DG level. So we're talking about the level 16. So that's 161 people in the public service. So we must put the numbers into context. So when you look at the top management, which we talk about from director to DG level, we're at 44%. So there's almost a level of parity. But in terms of day-to-day management of gender transformation and so forth in the public service, we just came back last week from a workshop that was looking at the issues linked to employee health and wellness in the public service, and there was a strong push around targeting things that affect females in the public service and how to daily manage those areas. So that's one of those things. So improving how we then report issues of sexual harassment, for instance, issues of violence, and appointing what we call, I don't like the term, but that's the term that my colleagues use, what we call a harassment advisor in the public service. So a harassment advisor is an individual that each and every department is supposed to appoint so that they can provide guidance, they can provide socialization of policies, they can provide a level of knowledge sharing and so forth. But also advocacy on the issues that might make it difficult to deal with transformation, to deal with gender-related issues. We have also introduced lactation rooms in the public service, where women that have young babies can go and pump for their kids later on and so forth. But there are a number of things, and these are daily things that happen throughout the public service that we think we should be able to share.
Yeah. Let's take a look at this graph. This graph gives us a different representation of what is happening around gender transformation, around top management level, once again, by gender in the year 2023. Importantly, it must be recognized that this, again, as a focus on what's happening in the private sector and the public sector collated together. This is what the picture for the country looks like. 26.9, 27% of top managers in the holistic pictures, the conflated picture are women, 27%. Now, shockingly low number. Like I said earlier on, part of the problem is not just in terms of getting women into the workplace, but making sure that the right policy adjustments are made, such as making sure that there's no pay gap disparity, making sure that harassment practices are adhered to. When it comes to the safety and well-being of women, the policies may be there. How it's implemented may leave a lot to be desired. And we live in a deeply patriarchal, deeply violent country. And it would be naive to assume that that patriarchy and sexism doesn't translate into the workplace. And the management of that, however incremental it may be, such as, you know, providing lactating facilities for women with young children who are mothers, is an important fixture. But how comfortable, from a culture in the workplace perspective, are women in making sure that these services are effective, but also making sure that you entrust the sexual harassment officers to be able to tell your story if you have been victimized sexually or otherwise in the workplace? Is there sufficient uptake?
Thanks. I think there is a sufficient uptake, but we can do better. For instance, one of the key challenges that we have is the issue of confidentiality. So if I report that I have been harassed by a colleague, you might end up finding it being discussed in corridors and so forth. So we need to find a way of, and that's why the professionalization part of the work is quite important. you might find it being discussed in the corridors, and then you lose hope in the system. You get ridiculed and all of those type of things. So we need to improve that element of dealing with issues of confidentiality. It also includes the part around being able to swiftly deal with allegations. Once someone says that I have been harassed, that there has been violence that has been meted against me, we need to find a way of dealing with that in a very quick way. But another aspect of it is that we have also seen an uptake or a rise in where people will make false allegations. So for us to safeguard the process, we have developed a new guideline on how we deal with false allegations, so that those that are harassed, those that are abused, they then are protected, and those that make false allegations then get dealt with, so that we deal with the major issues. But one important thing that I think I must raise is the issue of a whole society approach. When we talk about the whole society approach, is in the public service right now, if you have an issue that you're dealing with, whether it's depression, whether it's a harassment, whether there's whatever we see that doesn't assist you with productivity, we then also try to also go to your home and see what other conditions that are happening there, whether we need to provide counseling to the people that you are responsible for, that you support, and so forth, so that you have a whole societal approach. Your husband must understand that you are a working person, and we deal with those type of things. So what you're raising is quite important.
Zingiswa, I want to bring you into the conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. We realize that there's been a great deal of technical difficulties getting you connected to us, but you're here and we appreciate that. Organizing and mobilizing in the workplace for the advancement and inclusion of women, I can imagine, has not been an easy task over the last 30 years. Give us a sense of what that work looks like.
Thank you very much for having me, and greetings to you and the viewers and my fellow panelists. Indeed, we are 30 years into our democracy, and organizing in the trade union space in the workplace, it has its own challenges, but we must say that in the 30 years of democracy, we have seen significant changes. For an example, just to point the few issues, is the issue of the maternity protection that now has been extended. We would realize that in the past, women that would not be able to give birth naturally would be deprived of an opportunity of them having adopted children and be able to stay and connect with them. But currently, with the new legislation, we have 10 days adoption leave if you are to adopt a child that is less than 2 years. But also women in the past, if you go on maternity leave, you would have in the past to withdraw from your unemployment insurance fund, which depleted what you have. But now with the new amended Basic Conditions of Employment Act, we have a separate bag where women would be able to tap on it. But also I must say that it also covers women that have given birth to stillborn and miscarriages on the 3rd trimester, and also the LGBTQI community, same-sex couples, who are also covered. Part of the other issues that we are celebrating under difficulty in the 30 years of democracy is the national minimum wage. You would understand that organizing in the domestic space for domestic workers, it still continues to be a huge challenge. And but what we have been able to do as a country is to lift up domestic workers, and not just women but also men. Over 6 million of those that now, or actually it's 900,000 of the domestic workers who are now earning from 15 rands an hour, who currently, as we speak, 27 rand 58 cents. What we need to do with the Department of Employment and Labor is to ensure that there is compliance by employers with regards to the enforcement of the labor laws in our country. And I'm mindful of the time, but I must also say that another achievement that we have gained as workers is the extension of the workplace compensation, where now it has been extended to domestic workers in particular. And you will realize that the enclosed spaces that domestic workers operate in,
Yeah.
there are many traumas that they are going through. Part of what now has been added into the legislation is the post-traumatic stress disorder, not just for domestic workers, but for workers in general, acknowledging the fact that workers do go through stressful situations at work, and which in the past you would not be able to claim. But with the current amended legislation, workers, in particular domestic workers, now have been added into the legislation, and they're able to make the claim.
Yeah. Zingisa, unfortunately, we are very thin on time, so I'm going to have to leave it there with you. And I really, once again, want to thank you for joining us. Really appreciate it. To yourself as well, Nyeko Mabunda, really appreciate it. The Deputy Director General of Gender Transformation in the Public Service and Administration, as well as Zingiswa Losi, who is the President of COSATU. That's it for today's show. We are back with you next week for another installment of Democracy 30. Of course, still sticking to our theme here in August, focusing on issues directly affecting women in South Africa. From myself, Oliver Dixon, and the team, it's good night for now. Cheers.